Welcome to Democratic Television, a program of the Santa Clara County Democratic Party that brings insights, perspectives, and attitudes of our always thoughtful Democratic guests. Today we're joined by Ben Field, the Executive Officer of the South Bay Labor Council. Welcome to Democratic Television.
Thanks, it's good to be here.
So Ben, before we start talking about the South Bay Labor Council and all the things that go along with that, where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
I was born in upstate New York, a little town called Delhi in Delaware County. It's a dairy country. My grandfather raised heifers.
Oh.
And then about as far from that as you can get across the country, I grew up in San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So went to San Francisco schools and...
Yeah, I grew up in San Francisco going to a combination of parochial and public and private schools.
And anything outstanding happen in school? Were you on the debate club or the boxing club or the...
In high school, I was sort of a jack of all trades. I, tried to do a lot of different things at once. Most of them not all that well, I guess. But I definitely tried. I was a bench warmer on the basketball team and in student government and all that sort of thing.
Okay. So I'm just going to guess that after high school came college.
Yep, I went off to college, went back to New York for college. I went to Columbia, and that was a great experience for me. I enjoyed being in New York City. Was ready to leave by the time I was done, but that was a great experience.
And then somehow I've seen a PhD in your title.
Yeah, that came a little bit later. I worked for 4 years before moving back to California to go to law school, and then once I was in law school, decided to apply for the history program at Berkeley, which is where I was studying law.
Oh.
And
Bolt.
Yes, I was at Bolt for law school, and then I also joined the history program at Berkeley.
So any interesting role models or mentors while you were growing up? Anybody motivate you to say, one day I'm going to be the head of a great labor council?
I have to say, and this is probably to the viewers not going to sound particularly interesting, but my parents were the strongest influences on me. They both had a strong volunteer and public service ethic. My mom was involved with the disability rights movement early in my life, and some of my first jobs were through the Independent Living Center in San Francisco.
Oh.
And my dad was a trial attorney, worked on his own, had his own practice, and he always really thrived on those cases that he felt represented the little guy against somebody who was sort of a bully. And those experiences of my parents definitely rubbed off on me.
Did that lead you to want to go to law school and use the law as an instrument of social justice? Or?
Yeah, sometimes I think that influences on kids are so deep that they don't even think about them in a conscious way, and that was the way it was with me and the law. My dad really loved his practice, and I grew up thinking that a job was something that you were just meant to feel passion for. I didn't really think that I would go to law school. I didn't really think about law school, and then sometime in college it started to occur to me that maybe I would want to go to law school eventually, but I went to Washington, worked there for 4 years, and only during that time did I really decide that I wanted to be in law school. So I applied well after I'd left Columbia and went to law school after that.
So you had experience on the Hill?
Yes, yeah.
So what'd you do there?
Well, I worked for 2 Democratic icons, really 3 Democratic icons. I interned for Barbara Boxer. I interned for Barbara Boxer while I was in college, and then when I moved, and this is while she was Congresswoman.
Oh.
And when I graduated from college, I continued my internship, though not in San Francisco. I moved to Washington, and she was very good to me. She gave me interesting work to do, and she gave me a great recommendation that helped me get a job with Don Edwards,
Ah.
longtime congressman from here,
Oh,
and really somebody I looked up to at the time, and who was a model for me, and who I continue to look up to. Such a kind, decent person who has strong values and knows how to fight for them in a way that is courteous. I think it's a style of politics that is largely lost in Washington now. Anyway, so I had a great experience working in Don Edwards' office, and then I moved over to the Senate Banking Committee, the subcommittee on housing and urban affairs, which was at that time chaired by Senator Alan Cranston.
doesn't get better.
Yeah, so I worked there for a couple of years on housing legislation, and that also was a great experience.
Wow. Okay, so let's keep this timeline going. You came back and
Well, so while I worked in Washington, I got to know Susan Hammer,
Oh.
who was then on the San Jose City Council. She was interested in housing issues. At that time in San Jose, there was a big problem with and many of your viewers will probably remember this, there was a big problem with the prepayment of federal loans that had subsidized affordable housing. And when housing prices started going through the roof, the developers of those housing projects wanted to prepay their federal loans, get out from under the obligation to provide affordable housing, and start making more money by providing market rate housing.
yeah.
So that was a big problem in San Jose, and one that both Don Edwards and the Senate Banking Committee, Subcommittee on Housing, worked on. And I got to know Susan and other California housing advocates through my work. And when I decided to move back to California to go to law school at Berkeley, I talked to Susan, among other people, about the move back, and just to stay in touch more than anything else, found out that Susan was planning a run for mayor, and she ended up offering me a job working on her mayoral campaign. So I did that actually in between Washington and law school.
Oh,
And then when the primary was over, I started up at law school in Berkeley.
well, Susan Hammer, another great Democrat, a great public figure.
Yeah, and also another role model for me, someone who is practical and really able to get a lot done with a minimum of the sort of political nastiness that now has unfortunately become the signature of San Jose politics.
Yes. So after law school, you probably practiced law at some point.
I did. I finished law school, finished my coursework on my PhD, and then after I'd passed the bar, started working in the DA's office in Santa Clara County.
So why the DA's office? What was appealing to you there?
You know, I think not really coming from a law enforcement background, it didn't seem like an obvious choice. But my dad had, as I mentioned, been a trial attorney, and he loved being in trial, and the profession has really changed. So it's hard to get in trial unless you're going to be a defense attorney or a prosecutor. And I felt really good about being in the DA's office here. It was a great DA's office, and also it was a place where you could do what you thought was in the public's interest. You could represent the public and also be a zealous advocate, which appealed to me very much.
Yeah. So you had a career in the DA's office,
Yes.
and then somehow you ended up at the Labor Council.
Yeah, and I think many people feel like the transition from the DA's office to the labor movement is a big jump. It didn't really feel like that to me, in part because I knew people who were working at the Labor Council, and they'd been longtime friends, but also because I always felt like the work that I was doing in the DA's office, which is criminal justice work, was not that much different than the social justice work that we do at the Labor Council.
Mm-hmm.
And really, in both cases, what appealed to me most about the job was that in both places, in both workplaces, the mission was to stick up for the little guy.
Yeah.
In the DA's office, I prosecuted a lot of sexual assault cases, a lot of murder cases. That was most of what I did while I was there. And and those were victims who had been awfully abused.
Yeah.
So I felt strongly about sticking up for them. And in the labor movement, I think it's a different sort of context. No crime has been committed necessarily, but we're still talking about sticking up for people who don't necessarily have a voice.
Now, in the DA's office, I know there's a union of government attorneys. Did you play a role in that organization?
Somewhat. I wasn't an officer, but I was, as a member, an active member.
Mm. So, okay, so here you are now, the head of the labor movement in Santa Clara County. What led you to want to be a leader in the labor movement, to take a position and continue doing your advocacy work?
I think it's a really exciting time in the labor movement. I know that there's lots of press about how the labor movement is in decline, but I think that there are great opportunities for the labor movement right now. At this moment, I think there's growing awareness of the problems caused by income disparity, and the labor movement is part of the answer to that problem. As awareness grows of the income inequality in this country, I think that we in the labor movement have an opportunity to make the case that the labor movement can help cure that problem, and that in fact historically the availability of good paying jobs, of middle class jobs, has been very closely tied with the health of the labor movement.
And I know many people have decried the erosion of the middle class. So you see the labor movement as one way to fight for the working families and the middle class.
That's absolutely right. And I think there's a clear and increasingly well understood connection between the increase in middle class jobs, or the presence of middle class jobs, and the health of the labor movement. As we've seen the decline of the labor movement in terms of membership loss over the last decades, we've seen also the growth of income disparity and the hollowing out of the middle class.
Yeah. We're going to take a break right now. When we come back, let's continue our discussion.
Good, I'll look forward to it.
Be right back.
Hi, I'm Hope Cahan, and I am a planning commissioner for the city of San Jose. I got involved on the planning commission as a neighborhood activist. I felt as though the neighborhood wasn't quite being represented as well as I thought it should. There were many issues that it seemed as though to my fellow neighbors in my community that perhaps big business was getting more of a voice than the actual people who lived in the community that was being affected. And as a city planning commissioner, I really see the impact of neighbors getting involved, of coming before the planning commission, coming before city council, really sharing their voice and their concerns. And I'm here today as a fellow activist, neighborhood activist, to encourage all of you to come out and express your opinion and share your concerns with your elected officials. It's very important, and it really makes a difference.
Welcome back to Democratic Television and our guest, Ben Field, the new head of the South Bay Labor Council. Ben, before we talk about labor and its issues, I'd like to talk a little bit more about your family. You have a wife and a couple of kids. The hours working at the Labor Council, from what I heard, were pretty tremendous. How does your family put up with that? Tell me a little bit about your family.
It's hard. It's certainly hard, but I think a lot of families in Silicon Valley, really all over, know how hard it is when parents are working hard and long hours. But we try to have family dinner as often as we can. Oftentimes I have meetings or events that I need to go to at night, and so I'm sometimes not able to make it home for dinner. My wife Nancy and my kids Naomi and Abe understand. All three of them have volunteered at the Labor Council. They've walked a lot of precincts. They know what's going on, and they know how important it is. And you know, we have vacations where they probably see more of me than than they really feel like they need to during those vacation times.
But you don't take normal vacations. You don't just go to the beach or go to the mountains. You travel to different continents, different parts of the United States.
Right, right. They're used to all sorts of adventures. We've most often gone on backpacking trips in the Sierras, and we'll go for a week or more at a time in the summer. We usually do that once a year. But we've taken some more exotic trips too. We've gone to South and Central America. We went on a canoe trip in the Everglades, which was a real adventure. And so during those trips, we're together all the time, and sometimes in pretty close quarters, like a small tent. And that's what I meant when I said that probably gives them enough of a dose of me to last.
But you don't just go and hang out on the beaches in Peru. You actually volunteer in orphanages, and everybody's got their jobs and community service on an international level.
This last summer, we went on a trip to Peru, which we had been planning for many years. We'd hoped that we could give the kids a real immersion experience in a Spanish-speaking country. We actually talked about doing it for a year, but that was just too difficult to plan, and we ended up taking what was a very long vacation, but not quite a year. It was five weeks in Peru this last summer, and we volunteered. We did some volunteer work. We went to a language school. We mostly stayed in one area of Peru and really got to know the community there, and it was an immersion experience. It was a great experience.
So one other thing about you that I've learned is that you're not just a marathon runner. You go on runs that last 24 hours. What's up with that, Ben?
Well, the idea just captured my imagination years ago when I first heard about people who ran 100 miles. And at first, I think it struck me the same way it strikes many people, which is that it seems impossible, but it's not impossible. I did a few 50-mile races and felt increasingly confident about that. Not that my times were spectacular, but I started to be able to get through them in a way that gave me some sense that maybe I could take on 100 miles, and so I eventually did. I now run a number of 100-mile races.
Well, that's a little different.
Yeah, I suppose it is.
Anyway, so back to the work of the labor movement in Santa Clara County. We just came through recently what I think is a very successful election, pretty much at all levels. Some important state measures, some important local measures. Why did the labor movement play such an important role in those?
Well, we had really big interests at stake in a number of those races. Really, Prop 32 was a life or death struggle for us.
And which was that?
Prop 32 is the measure that would have really barred unions from collecting money for political activity from their members. And that, if it had succeeded, would have been devastating to the efforts of the labor movement to speak on behalf of working families in the state of California. So that was a life or death struggle. And there were other causes that were really central to the interests of working families. And that's why there was an outpouring of support for those campaigns.
So what are some of the local measures that labor decided to get involved with, and what was the role that labor played?
The Labor Council really ran the campaigns for Measure A, Measure B, Measure D, and a number of candidate campaigns. And I say we ran it, but we had plenty of community support. Plenty of others were involved in each of those campaigns in pivotal roles, in leadership roles. But the field program was run to a large extent by the Labor Council. And we had really great success in those campaigns. Measure A, which your viewers may remember was the measure to raise the sales tax in this county to support county services, which are vital, especially to the most underprivileged people who need healthcare services.
Healthcare services were one of the items that was part of the fight.
That's right. That was really central to the Measure A campaign, and that was a successful campaign. Measure D, of course, everyone's favorite campaign, the campaign to raise minimum wage in the city of San Jose, was also successful with the help of many community partners. And Measure B, which provides now the funding for a clean and safe water supply, was also successful. All of those really important to the entire community.
So what does it mean to have the labor movement involved in elections, local or statewide? We hear so much about the far right, the Republican interests putting in tons of money. I don't think of labor as being as well funded. What is the value that you bring?
Right, we're not as well funded. In the Measure D minimum wage campaign, for instance, the Chamber of Commerce said that they were going to raise over $1.5 million, and we knew we would not have that kind of money. But we also knew we had the power of the people behind us. We had a tremendous campaign organization, a great team of leaders and campaign organizers, and a large number of people to knock on doors and make phone calls. And that sort of political contact, I think, is the most valuable political contact, and it was really the reason for our success.
So you're able to work with union leaders to have them have their members turn out, have members of the community turn out, and a great reason why you were successful.
That's right. We had literally thousands of volunteer days put into this last campaign season, and without that grassroots volunteer effort, the campaigns that we worked so hard on, I think, would not have been successful.
So the labor movement is going into 2013 with some great victories, some enthusiasm. What do you see the Labor Council and the labor movement in Santa Clara County engaging in 2013 and beyond?
We certainly need to build on the victories that we've had. The legacy left to me by Cindy Chavez at the labor movement is one of great political success, and we need to look forward to see what the next big political campaigns are going to be. I think certainly we're going to want to build on the victory that we've had with raising the minimum wage. That should be really a statewide effort, and certainly there'll be a regional effort as well to raise the minimum wage.
So you say a political campaign, perhaps at the state level, legislation then becomes important, and having relationships with elected officials, hopefully people that the Labor Council's endorsed to then fight for the labor agenda.
That's right. We've got a very strong local delegation in the state legislature. They are elected representatives who care deeply about the interests of working families, and we will be working with them on their legislative agendas to support them in their efforts to advance legislation that helps working families in Sacramento.
So do you get together with them and say, here's some areas that we think are important, and have those kinds of collaborations so the agenda is a sort of a mutually agreed agenda?
Absolutely. We're in touch with them really all the time whenever an issue comes up, but also in advance of the legislative agendas being set. I feel that we have great input into the work that's done by our delegation in Sacramento.
And at the local level, we have many cities, city council members, schools become increasingly important, relationship with school board members. How do you see working with all those different organizations and elected officials?
Well, we have strong relationships with many on city councils throughout the county, and also on school boards. And let me just take a minute to talk about school boards, because that's something that doesn't usually get talked about.
Yeah.
We we look at school boards as important for several reasons. One is because although many of the people who are running for those offices are there because they care primarily about education issues, they end up dealing with many other issues, oftentimes labor issues. And so we are involved with them on the labor issues as well as some of the education issues that really are the focus and ought to be the focus of school board efforts. But also we are involved with school boards because really that is where up and coming leaders come from to run for city council and other offices. Oftentimes we see people coming from school boards and running for higher office, and so we want to get to know people who are running for school boards, and we want to cultivate good people to run for school boards.
We have about a minute left. If somebody wants to get involved in the Labor Council, communicate with you, do you have an email address, a website you could share with us?
Sure. The website is atwork.org, and my email address is ben@atwork.org. I can always be reached at the Labor Council. The number there is 408-266-3792. And I would be happy to have anybody who's interested in volunteering to help out with our efforts get in touch with us. We've got plenty of work to do.
And you don't just look for union members, you look for community.
We have all sorts of community members coming
Great.
in and helping us out with our campaigns.
Great. Well, thanks for being on the show.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks for watching Democratic Television. Give us a call at 408-445-9500 or visit our website, www.sccdp.org. Help make a difference. I will see you on the